So in the last part, we mostly went over the numbers, mostly geometry. And in this part, we're going to go over a lot of the names that you're going to see in terms of brands and parts, and how to try to separate them and try to find what to look for and what to avoid. So here we have a wide comparison of bikes that are basically going to go from 1200 at the lowest end for full suspension. And for this comparison, we're just going to go all the way up to 2500. And even if you took away the sale prices, the lowest, the cheapest bike would be like 17 or 1800. But just going off these current sale prices here, we'll see that we go from 1200 all the way up to 2500. And so the question is, what makes these bikes at like 2500 twice the value of something at 1200? What's making these bikes $1,000 more, and is it worth it to pay $1,000 more? So right off the bat, we're going to start with a differentiation between direct-to-consumer brands and traditional bike shop or brick-and-mortar brands. So here Polygon at the cheap end, that's direct-to-consumer. Of course, these Canyons are direct-consumer, as well as YT with this Jeffsy here. However, Marin and Giant here are traditional bike shop brands. So typically speaking, you are getting those lower prices with direct to consumer, and of course what you're missing out on is the bike shop experience, but depending on your situation, you might not value that much. If you're in an area that doesn't really have good bike shops to begin with, and you're comfortable with wrenching on things in your own garage, then direct to consumer is perfect for you. If you're not comfortable with working on your own bike and you do have a local bike shop that you trust and think you'll have a good experience with in terms of service and warranty, then you may not see as much value in saving $500 or $1,000 or whatever. If you feel like you're just going to end up paying that out in tools and wasting time trying to do your own service if you're not familiar with that kind of thing. Now that we understand those two key differences, let's try to dive in and see where we're doubling in price from this low end to this higher end. So right off the bat with our first bike, that Polygon T6, we're seeing the lower end X Fusion shock, and we're also seeing the lower end thinner RockShox Recon. The Recon definitely isn't an outright bad fork for a beginner, but even a beginner who's progressing quickly, or just somebody who's a heavier weight adult in the first place, is going to find the limits to that fork fairly quickly. That said, Polygon very quickly goes up in value for this low-end Fox suspension package up to the T8. Obviously the T7 exists and is a good midway point, but I feel like if you have the funds to get that, you might as well bump up to the T8. So right away for direct to consumer brands, we have a really good option. And then for our brick and mortar bike shop brand, we have the Marin Rift Zone 1. Again, the X Fusion shock paired with the X Fusion fork. Now while it's the same low end shock that I'm not very fond of, I will say that the X Fusion fork with the thicker stanchions is probably going to be a better platform than the RockShox Recon for your heavier weight adult or your beginner who's going to progress quickly. And then right away for 100 more for our traditional brands with Giant, we have that Trance X3, which has a very nice package of the base Fox shock that I really like, and the RockShox Yari, which is a decent fork. It's a bit of an upgrade over that 35 Gold RL you may see, and the Yari can take like Lyric internals, so technically you could replace the internals and turn it into a Lyric Ultimate, and it'll just have heavier, cheaper lowers. And here we get into Canyon's lowest end offerings, and we're still bumping up a bit in price, so we're going to enter that conversation where paying more doesn't always get you more if you're not paying attention. So for the Spectral 5, it comes with that 35 silver fork. That just has the little turnkey damper. I'm sure the fork is pretty functional, but we've already passed the T8 and that Trance X3. I'd rather have the Yari, or I'd rather have the Fox Float 34. I mean, I haven't tried that specific X Fusion fork, so I don't want to talk about the slide, but it's possible that even that X-Fusion slide on the Marin is a better damper and lockout system than the RockShox 35 Silver. The 35 Gold RL, I don't know if any of the bikes here have it, but that is a better fork, and that's something that you need to know, you know. A 35 Silver with a turnkey damper is really cheap, not very good. Whereas the 35 Gold RL is, you know, similar to the Yari. It's basically a thicker Recon type fork. And then again, with Canyon's Neuron here, they're using that same Recon fork that we saw on the Polygon T6 all the way down there at 1200. So it's not that it's a bad bike, but these are just values you should be looking for, especially when we've already had better values that are cheaper than this, such as the T8 and the Trans X3. So we're going to continue on and get into some of the better bikes that have really good suspension packages. Here this Trans has the Bomber up front, the same nice Fox shock. Jeffsy has a nice standard RockShox package with the Lyric. The Polygon has an awesome package of the Zeb big 38mm chunky fork up front with the Super Deluxe Select Plus with the lockout. Marzocchi package on this Haro Daily, and then we get to the Cannondale Habit 4. So we only went up like $100. You know, a lot of these bikes are similar, but again, how many great bikes did we just pass? And now we're back to this Recon fork. But still, I bring this up specifically the Cannondale because it is kind of one of the unique brands where you could buy it at a bike shop, but one place that you could buy it that a lot of people might like is they tend to be offered through REI. And again, if you don't have a great local bike shop, at least REI has a bit more of a consistent policy. And of course, if you have their little rewards card or whatever, you can get money back, and then you could potentially buy a replacement fork and replace that Recon if you want. But again, that's probably not the route I would go. It's just a unique option if you want a local bike shop experience but don't really have a good one and aren't sure how to feel about that. At least you can just go to REI and expect that typical solid REI experience. And then from this point out, it's basically good. A nice RockShox package, bombers, RockShox shock with the DVO front, and then the RE with DVO front and rear. DVO is just another solid suspension brand. I wouldn't avoid it for any reason. Some people would say if you don't have a local service to maintain your DVO, that could be an issue, but you know, most people are actually shipping their products in to do anyways. So if you don't have a local service, you could just ship it out and have it serviced in that way. Now we're going to move on to the drivetrain real quick and do the same thing. So for this cheapest Polygon T6, we have that new Shimano QS drivetrain system. That's going to be a really good option, especially for the price, and especially because that system has a cool, unique, like, I think they have like a 9 and 10 and 11 cassette, and you could upgrade or downgrade if you want, whatever you do within that little QS Link Glide system. And again, with the Polygon T8, that upcharge is going to get you to SLX. The T7 would have Dior, but man, just go up to that T8, get the SLX derailleur, and that'll be much better. And then we have some solid Dior offerings for Marin and Giant, and then that same situation with Canyon at their lowest end. We're cutting corners quite a bit with the SRAM SX, which I just can't recommend, especially for that price if we've already had really great bikes with QS, Dior, and SLX already. So then we're going to keep moving on with the Giant with Dior, and then the YT Jeffsy with NX. Now, NX is good, and it's definitely good at this price point. What I typically say with NX is just don't pay too much for it. You don't want to be paying like SLX XT type prices. So, you know, kind of comparing to the T8, I'd prefer to have SLX to NX. I'd even prefer to have like Dior, maybe even QS. You know, the NX system is HG, and honestly, the Polygon T8, even though it runs SLX, they actually throw an HG cassette on it, so it's honestly not that huge of a deal. Within the HG system, you could stick with NX, you could move it over to the QS of Shimano, but for the low-end drivetrains, I would really say Shimano stands out as the better value. But that said, you know, NX for this GFC Core 1 is totally fine. It would be ideal to move up to the Core 2 and get GX. Then we're going to move on with the Polygon Dior, the Haro Daily with QS. Obviously Haro is a traditional brick and mortar brand, so that value is kind of whatever. You know, we've already looked at giant trances with Dior, so probably don't want to downgrade to QS. That Cannondale has Dior, and this YT Izzo has SX. YT does seem to be changing this with their line going forward. The Capras have had a lot of the low-end Shimano stuff, but Izzo is kind of the next bike to be updated, so it still got stuck with that Core 1 NX, Core 2 NX system, which I really don't like, especially because the Core 3, I think, then goes straight to the wireless stuff and bumps up quite a bit in price. So I think they skip mechanical GX now, which is really a bummer. So obviously for that model, I'd be wanting to go at least for the Core 2 for NX. It's not really an ideal value in that way. There's probably another bike you could get where you're not dealing with SX NX, such as the Giant Trance or the Polygon TA. For the Ibis Ripmo, we have a GX mix. A lot of these systems are going to be mixes. So typically that name is actually explaining, you know, the derailleur at most and maybe a few other bits. It's typically not all SLX or all GX, so you want to go into that spec sheet and double check those things. The Marin has Dior, the Norco Fluid has an NX SX mix, so the important thing would be it has that nice NX derailleur. And that's the thing, when you look at the bike visually in its product photo, you'll see that SX crank, and that can be alarming, but you do want to go into the spreadsheet and double check, and you'll see that it's actually running the NX derailleur, not the SX derailleur. And then the Ari has QS for quite a bit of money, so not a great value. And then this Ripmo and Capra have Dior. So again, the important thing here, aside from, you know, avoiding SRAM SX and not paying too much for SRAM NX, the important thing is to double check the spreadsheet to see what the mix is, because right now you're looking at the Polygon TA and saying, well, that's hands down the best value for the price, SLX all the way down there. But I'm pretty sure that's just the derailleur, and then everything else is Dior. And to make it worse, the cassette they use is HG spec, it's not microspline. So your wheel, your free hub, is stuck in HG, which is, you know, SX, NX, QS, and microshift type products. Now going down the spec sheet, what other things can we look out for? Well, this isn't a huge deal, but for me, with the amount of money you're spending on mountain bikes, I think it's important, and I think brands should be getting away from press fit bottom brackets and using threaded systems instead. Now for what I picked, most of these are threaded, but I will note that the YT Izzo is press fit. YT has traditionally been press fit. It looks like they're moving their alloy models to threaded, but the carbons are remaining press fit for now. So we'll see if that changes in the future. If you're wondering what the difference is, it's kind of in the name. Threaded bottom bracket is the frame is going to be threaded so that you can just basically screw your bearings in, and that means you can screw them in and out pretty easily and clean them, maintain them, or just replace them easier. With the press fit, they're quite literally going to have to be pressed to fit into the bearing. Using a tool, you're going to want to get the alignment really right, and then any moisture or dust or anything ingressing into that press fit could cause issues down the line. And then even worse, when it comes to maintaining it and popping them out, most people will just buy new bearings to install, because once you've popped them out, unless you're really good at it and did it real careful, you might slightly damage the bearings anyways. So for cheap bikes, it's kind of whatever, but honestly, I've seen BMX bikes and dirt jumpers with threaded now, so I don't see any reason to be using press fit on bikes that cost thousands of dollars. So here we have a lot of consumable parts and like contact points and small parts. And I'm not going to have a big emphasis on these because a lot of times you should probably be changing them to fit your style anyways. And right now I'm not really talking about bikes that don't have a dropper, so you know, obviously I recommend getting one that does, but otherwise it's not a big deal. And you can just add one later. Here we'll get a quick glance at the drivetrain mix thing I was talking about earlier for that Norco. So NX derailleur, and then everything else on it is SX. Oh, we got NX shifter. That's actually good because I don't like that SX shifter either. So they did this right. NX derailleur, shifter, and then for like crank and chain and cassette or whatever, not a big deal. Then over here, GX derailleur for the Ritmo, and then NX everything else. For brakes, the conversation is a little bit harder because you enter a lot more like subjectivity and what you want from brake feel. But let's just look at what we get as we go up. Shimano 201, just standard low-end Shimano 2-piston brakes for that T6. Not bad, not good. In terms of value, kind of makes sense for the bike. For the T8, we have the Tektro 4-piston brakes, and the T7 has the mix with 4-piston front and 2-piston rear. And honestly, these aren't too bad either. Tektros tend to feel a bit like Shimano's, and they're gonna work okay once you change that pad and rotor. But here with the Marin, we're gonna get to the 2-piston Tektros. Bit of a downgrade in general. I'd rather have the Shimano 2 pistons, but not a huge deal at that price. Still decent value. Giant Trans using the same Tektros that the T8 used. For the Spectral 5, these DB8s are okay, not great, but okay. And then for this Neuron, the SRAM level Ts are a pretty bad value. Of course, with that bike, it's supposed to be nearly an XC bike. It's like a short travel trail, but that's a bit of a bummer value. And then when you pair it with the rest of the bike and SRAM SX and the Recon and everything, that's just not a good value top to bottom. Again, we've already passed things that have better builds than this. Same Tektros on the Giant, DB8s on the Jeff C. Again, not great, but not bad. Looks like the Polygon is running the mix setup, that N7, similar to the T7. Still fine, but for that huge bike, the Polygon N7, I would want the 4-piston front and rear, so that's kind of a bad value. Tektro 2-piston Geminis on this Haro, not a great value. I mean, obviously the bike's cheap, but again, we've already passed Giants that have better brakes. Low-end 2-piston Shimanos on the Cannondale, again, not great at this point. SRAM G2s on the Izzo, better than the Levels, and probably similar-ish to the DB8. So, you know, these are, again, not good, not bad, pretty fitting for the value. Same thing with the Ritmo here. Rift Zone 2 has these Tektros. I'm not sure about this model. I'm hoping it's 4-piston front and rear, but that would be okay, similar to the setup on the Polygon. Norco Fluid, TRP Evos, 4-piston, those are nice. TRP it's Tektro, but it's their higher end stuff. If it just says Tektro, that's probably their lower end stuff. For any of the higher end stuff they make, they're gonna use TRP instead of Tektro. 4-piston Tektros for the RE. At this price, really not great. You know, they're okay-ish by being 4-piston, but I mean, 180 rotors front and rear, cheap Tektro brakes for that price, not great. We're already getting awesome Shimano 4-piston Dior in this Ritmo and getting the usable DB8s on the Capra. For wheels, it's pretty rare that you get good wheels stock, but there's probably two things I'd want to look for. One important thing, and you're not going to see it often, but you do want to get boost axles. You're probably not going to see the non-boost axles much like the gravel wheels now. But interestingly, as an example, we have that Marin Rift Zone 1, which gives you it's basically a boost wheel that's running a quick release skewer and has like an adapter to make it work to the frame. So to my knowledge, you literally just have to buy the normal boost axle and then install it. I think you just take the adapter out of the frame or whatever, and then it runs as normal because it's supposed to be the same frame, I believe, as the Rift Zone 2. So really, really incredibly strange way to save $5 or $10 there, but whatever. You should just know that going into it. And then again, for your free hub spec, in terms of upgrading or even just replacing your drivetrain, HG is going to be your SX, NX, QS, and microshift type drivetrains. But it's not a big deal because it really is just about cassette compatibility. And because of how wide range things are, even if they're 9 or 10 speed like QS or microshift, you're definitely not being screwed over if you have HG. You just want to know that going into it, in case you, for whatever reason, did want to get an SLX or XT cassette on like your T8, but then you realize the free hub and wheel is HG standard. And then one thing you could look out for if you're really skimping is the idea of tubeless compatible rims or tubeless ready rims. But you know, even on this cheap Polygon T6, they have tubeless ready. It might even be taped out the box, so that's probably not an issue you're going to run into a lot unless you're buying sort of older, cheaper bikes used or secondhand. It's just nice when they're taped out of the box, so you don't have to do the taping yourself, so you can convert to tubeless immediately. So just to finish out with an interesting example of cheaper bikes, we have this Roscoe 6 at $1,200 and this Marlin 7 at $1,300. So the Marlin is costing you more, and this is from the same brand, but the Roscoe comes with the QS drivetrain and the Suntour fork, which are the parts I would prefer compared to the SX drivetrain and that really thin turnkey RockShox Judy fork. And then just to top it all off, again, the Marlin is the more expensive bike, but it's still running quick release wheels, which means that frame is set up for a quick release, so you can't really convert that in any way. Whereas the Roscoe has boost axles front and rear, so it's going to be a bit easier to find wheels to replace it with, and they're going to be higher quality. It's an interesting comparison. You might be asking, well, if that's the case, why is it more expensive and where's that money going? And it's just a few small things that don't really matter, like the Roscoe 6 is coming with tires that are not tubeless ready. The Marlin 7 is coming with tires that are tubeless ready. And of course the Marlin is more of a cross-country bike and the Roscoe is more of a trail bike. So it's just a unique situation where, as far as I'm concerned, you're getting way more bike for your money and you're getting less bike if you're paying $100 more to get that higher end Marlin. So that's just an example of what you're going to see if you're kind of shopping from like $1,000 to $2,500, and what things to look out for to make sure that you're not getting less bike even if you're paying more upfront. And then the next part, we're going to try to do a similar thing, but looking at used and secondhand bikes, and kind of go over what to look for with older bikes and maybe how far back you should even go.